I saw a shadow person once. I didn't know that's what it was called until much later. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day, my new wife and I were arguing. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off, and I was alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and living room on one side, then a bathroom with 2 entrances. On the other side of the bathroom was a hallway that had windows on one side and 2 bedrooms on the other. From my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser, and I just noticed movement out of the corner of my eye and looked down there. There was, and honest to God, this gives me goosebumps just typing it, 17 years later, a black figure. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and it was only vaguely humanoid. It looked like black scribbles, like someone had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved, like electricity arcing. That's the best way to describe it. There was no sound that I could remember. I distinctly remember when I saw it I wasn't afraid, just surprised. Then it noticed me looking at it. I can't say it turned around, it just focused on me, I guess. Then I was scared. I didn't move, didn't scream, anything. I was just frozen, because it just fucking came at me. It rushed down the hall towards me. I have no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut on it. Then I screamed. I yelled for my wife. She wasn't home. I went the fuck outside, into the daylight, and didn't go back in until she got home about 10 minutes later. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe I saw something supernatural, but I know I saw something. I don't know what it was. Story 2. In the town I lived in, as long as it was a clear night, it was an extremely normal occurrence to see all sorts of strange lights move across the sky. Keep in mind that winter is long in the Arctic, which means longer amounts of time being spent under the stars. It's quite beautiful, as long as you don't mind the cold so much. Sometimes I would drive a snowmobile a few kilometers out of town, shut it down, and just lay down on the snow looking up at the majesty of it all, the only thing disturbing the silence being the occasional breeze. The northern lights are also a common occurrence. Doesn't happen every day, but often enough that they start getting ignored after a while, as long as they aren't too spectacular anyway. On one particular night, without asking my parents, it was their snowmobile, I decided to go on one of my midnight drives out of town. I drove a few kilometers over the hills to find a spot devoid of light pollution from town, shut off the machine, and settled into a good spot to look up and be retrospective. It wasn't all that interesting a scene. A few satellites passing here and there, some relatively boring activity affecting the magnetic field, etc. And then I started noticing a clicking noise. At first, I thought it was the sound of the snow machine cooling down, as the engine expands and contracts a lot in the cold. But the source of the sound wasn't coming from that direction. My next thought was there must be an animal nearby, in which case I need to get out of there fast. You don't want to mess with a wild animal. But the clicking is far too regular for an animal to produce it. It was fairly mechanical sounding. And again, the source of the sound isn't coming from anywhere around me laterally. It was coming from up. So naturally I look up, determined to ascertain the origin of this strange noise. I see what I always see: stars, northern lights, a lazy satellite crossing the sky, all normal stuff. But before I dismiss it altogether and begin heading home, I noticed something strange in the aurora borealis. There were 3 rather strong points of light. I ignored them at first, thinking they were oddly symmetrical stars, but this proved false. They were getting brighter. I kept staring in morbid fascination as they grew stronger and stronger, yet still only remained single points in the sky. All the while the clicking noise is getting louder and more pronounced, almost like someone started tapping a pen on a desk to clacking billiard balls together inside my head. Then it stops. The lights are gone, the clicking is not heard, and aside from being a little stiff, cold, and rather petrified, I'm fine. So, I jump back on the snowmobile thinking maybe I'm going crazy. The machine takes a little longer than usual to start up, and I'm beginning to worry, but soon it's running and I'm heading back to town. As I'm driving back, several plausible scenarios as to what occurred are running through my head. I'm thinking it could have been a helicopter from the mine, or some strange Northern Lights behavior, etc. Probably not that big a deal. I pull up to my house. The lights are all dark. Strange. It wasn't that late when I left. Open the outer door as quietly as possible, remove winter gear, and enter the inner door. House is quiet. Quiet. My parents are teachers and are usually up late marking or watching TV. All I'm thinking is I have to get to bed without anyone noticing. Proves to be easy as I'm soon under my covers. I go to set my alarm for the next day. All of a sudden everything makes sense. Engine hard to start, stiff, rather chilly, nobody up when I was gone what felt like a relatively short period. It was almost 11 p.m. when I left, and now it was creeping up at 6 a.m. I stood, staring at clicking lights for almost 7 hours. I never ended up sleeping that night, and I don't go on late night snow machine rides anymore. Story 3. There was a small door that led to attic space in my bedroom, 11 years old to 13, and it became a habit that I would shut the door as I walked into my bedroom a couple times a week. I didn't think anything of it, just assumed my mom didn't close it all the way when she left it. After a while I made the mistake of joking with her when she commented on my not picking up after myself. I said something like, "Every night I have to close the attic door behind you, how about you shut it all the way when you're done?" She then informed me that she hasn't been in the attic in months. Asked my brother, nope. Asked my father, nope. So then I started to pay close attention to it. Making sure it was closed in the morning, checking it after school, checking blaster dinner. Then head up to the bed and open. After a couple of months of wondering, studying, and experimenting, I thought I'd see what happens if I just don't shut it. Opened the door before school and checked it after school, still open. Checked it after dinner, still open. Before bed, still open. Now I'm laying in bed, mind going crazy with the open door across the room. Decide to check it out, so I roll over and focus on the black space into the attic to see a face staring back at me. Bolt downstairs, wake parents, get ridiculed by a brother, switch bedrooms, brother, move into a new house about 6 months later due to expanding household. A new physics teacher and his wife bought our house. I could have forgotten all about that event and chalked it up to me having an overactive mind. But then my senior year I discovered how awesome our physics teacher was. Became my favorite class and by far my favorite teacher. End of senior year, my friend and I took our VHS camcorder around town, doing mostly silly things, but then took it to my old house to see what they'd done with the place. We got a very fun tour. I got to tell stories about all the projects my dad did that were still part of the house. Then the wife leads us upstairs to show us the sewing room. I ask, jokingly, "Notice anything strange in this room?" and her face goes blank. On camera, she asks what I mean and I try to shrug it off, but end up saying something about the attic door. She confirmed that every time she comes up to sew, the attic door is open. She then tells us that on the second day of being in the house, their dog, German Shepherd, had gone into the room but would not go back downstairs. He started barking and could not be consoled, and then jumped through the window, landing on the tin roof over the porch and then running off. The dog did not come back until the next day and has not stepped foot into the hallway that leads upstairs since. I had the initial thought that I could show my parents and brother the story I had on film, but I decided to just let it be. Story 4. In my childhood home, I would often hear touch typing coming from the computer downstairs early in the morning. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents worked from home and it wouldn't be uncommon to wake up in the morning to hear Mom typing away at the computer. One day I got up and called out to Mom, assuming she was down there working, as I could hear typing. No answer. No one was down there at all. I was sure I heard typing. This began happening regularly. I figured I was so used to hearing typing from downstairs that I was hearing things that weren't there, so I didn't mention anything to anyone, figuring I was going a bit crazy. This happened on and off over 6 months. The sound of fast typing and fast, furious clicking of a mouse as if someone was frustrated. One morning I was eating my breakfast when I heard Mom at the top of the stairs call out to me, "You're not down there on that computer already?" I froze and ran out to her. I was amazed she had heard it too. She was convinced she could hear typing, yet no one was down there. I told her about all the times I'd been hearing it, and then my sister opened up about hearing it regularly too when no one was down there. I wasn't crazy after all. I set out to try to catch whatever was causing it and to try to discover a rational explanation for it. I'd sprint out of my bedroom to the top of the stairs where I was able to look down into the room to see if anyone was at the computer. No such luck. Every time I got there it stopped. I think it went on for a couple of years, and we learned just to kind of live with it as it wasn't every day. I was down there once when the ceiling light globe in the center of the room began flashing very fast, strobe-like. It then exploded and glass went shattering all across the room. I was lucky I ran out of the room when it started happening because I was scared, the whole mysterious typing, you know. If I hadn't run, I would have been hit with bits of light bulb. Around that same time, I was on the computer at home by myself when something happened that resulted in me never being alone in that room again. I felt and heard this sharp intake of breath directly behind my right shoulder near my ear. I've never run so fast in my life and was hesitant to go in that room ever again. Before that, the whole typing thing had just been something weird and a bit spooky. Still makes my heart race when I think about it today. I've never really encountered anything like this before or since all those events. I don't particularly believe in ghosts either, but I'm open to the possibilities of something that scientists don't have a proper explanation for yet. Story 5. Pretty sure I lived in a haunted house for a while. Strange things. For one, I always felt like I was being watched in my room, and if I had the door open to the hallway, I would swear I'd see someone walk by out of the corner of my eye. We had 2 cats, and sometimes they'd be in my room sleeping, and then all of a sudden, they would sit bolt up and stare at the door, and nothing I did could move them for a long time. This happened often. One day in my bathroom, the shelf that had my sister's beauty stuff randomly lose hold of all of the items. The thing was, the shelf wasn't lost or hanging, and all the stuff had to bounce out of a 2-inch high lip into the sink. One time in the middle of the night, my sister's 100-plus-year-old dresser she got as a gift from her grandma just fell over. This thing weighed a ton, and it was built like a tank. Sister said she heard the sound of someone pushing. Mom and sister used to yell at me for sneaking around the house, only I wasn't home or I was in my room. They said they saw a man in the shadows that was about my height. One day we also ran into the old owner, and my mom casually asked the lady if she had ever experienced anything in the house. The lady started crying and said no one believed her, but yes, she experienced a lot of stuff. I moved out around that time. I do not miss that place. Story 6. I used to work doing maintenance at historic properties. There was a historic house museum I worked at when it wasn't open to the public. It was part of a whole landmark site. There was a visitor center with offices, and then the house was about half a mile up a dirt road in a wooded area. Sometimes I worked with a crew, but there were a lot of times I was there alone. One winter day, when it was cloudy and dark, I was working alone to get ready to replace some electric work on the exterior of the house. I went inside and turned off the circuit to the whole property, and I tested it. It was off. I locked the doors and went outside to work. After about an hour, I got down from my ladder and started walking around the house, and then one of the lights inside the house turned on. I started to freak out, but thought that maybe someone was playing a joke on me. I called the visitor center on my walkie-talkie and confirmed that the only other person who was working that day was still there and hadn't left, and that all the keys to the house were present and accounted for. That's when I freaked out and ran the half-mile up to the office. I made my coworker come back with me to check out what was going on, but when we got to the house, the light was off again, but the bulb was still warm. All the doors were still locked and the circuit was still off. Still gives me shivers to this day. Story 7. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed up in my dad's car that he had willed to me to the cabin. Now this was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when we were not using it. I had keys to the cabin and also had the code for the alarms, so I did not feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them of my stay. This has nothing to do with the coming story, but felt the need to mention it anyway. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal and nothing unusual happened. Spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking, and smoking out on the balcony. Had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog as a company and DVD/PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he also since passed, playing games and watching DVDs. That day it was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees, tall. This is important later on. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. Gave enough background and I'm going to jump to the weirdness. Around midday while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may not have noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Alright, whatever. The prints lead away from my cabin and they disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. Disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around and decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up to a standstill/listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I was kind of freaked out and could hear him moving around downstairs back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. Shit. Well, fine. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier. But he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up toward the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go to where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright, maybe there are forest animals out there that he wants to chase down. But fuck this, did not want to change anything, so I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing, the steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride. So it was freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting me to let him out. Alright, you know what, I'm a tough guy and at the time considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out onto the balcony. Fuck it, right? As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the smell on top was undisturbed. Weird, must have been on my head? What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my fear or paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again.